Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited here to present Matthew Melendez, who is going to talk about El Sistema in early childhood. If you would love to maybe make sure that you are able to access your chat so you can ask Matthew questions along the way, but he will have a question and answer period at the end of his presentation. So I'm going to let Matthew take it away.
All right, well, hello, and thank you so much for coming to this session when you could and perhaps should be listening to the amazing Eric Booth, who's probably referenced in my dissertation as much as or more than anyone else. My name is Matthew Melendez, and I'm here today to talk to you about applying El Sistema principles in early childhood and what I think that can do for us as teaching artists, for our organizations, and most importantly, for our shared mission of social change through music. I'm so honored to be here today and want to first just express my great appreciation to our colleagues at ESUSA and to all of you for your interest in our work. To begin, I'm the founder and the general director of the Great Bend Center for Music. Great Bend designs and offers research-based programs that help people use music to find common cause, nourish trust, and address community challenges. Our mission is music that builds community. We're almost 5 years old, and we're located on the beautiful South Shore of Hood Canal in the historic arts village of Union, Washington, with a year-round population of a whole 801 people. We may be very small, but we're a stunningly beautiful place, known affectionately 100 years ago as the Venice of the Northwest, because you could only get here by boat. And in case you didn't know, Hood Canal is the only fjord in the lower 48, and this fact will become important a bit later in the presentation. Great Bend provides a range of community music programs, which include not only lessons, ensembles, and classes for our rural community, but also therapeutic music. But our big vision, which we're working hard on with collaborators like the University of Washington, Petros Partners Financial, and Innovative Education Solutions Worldwide, is to establish North America's first Institute for Applied Research in Community Music. The rendering above shows our planned childcare and community music centers, which is just a portion of our campus. But today, I'm here to talk about what we've learned about applying El Sistema principles in early childhood, how we're doing it entirely virtually, and the opportunity we believe that there is for all of us as El Sistema educators and organizational directors. I will absolutely do my best to track and respond to chat and discussion requests and comments during the presentation. However, I am a Gen Xer, be kind. If I've put this together right, there should be plenty of time at the end for Q&A and some discussion in case I don't see your comment in question. Also, please feel free to email me directly. You should have my contact information from the card Symposium platform we're using. But in case not, you can reach me at Matthew, 2 T's, at greatbendmusic.org. Now, since I and my amazing team are working to build North America's first Institute for Applied Research in Community Music, I should probably first tell you about what kind of research we're working to apply or programatize. First, I want to admit I'm new-ish to El Sistema, and I do not think of myself as an expert. I am deeply inspired, however, and learning quickly. This is me 10 years ago, working with the University of Washington Chorale, which is the UW's flagship undergraduate choir. My master's is in vocal performance and pedagogy, and my doctoral work, ABD, don't at me, is in choral conducting. My research, however, has always focused on the community development impacts of community music, or community music's sociological effects. In other words, what I study is what community music does for building strong families and strong communities through things like school readiness and improved academic achievement, but also how music strengthens community by building bridging social connections, improving both information flow and a community's overall adaptive capacity, how music strengthens community by facilitating a sense of place, belonging, ownership, investment, and civic engagement, as well as community pride, and how music strengthens community economically, especially the more difficult to quantify indirect economic impacts that are hugely important, such as workforce development, health, and wellness. So you can imagine when I began learning about El Sistema, it was very exciting. I love the concepts and the approach, And I loved especially how it aligned with the needs of our small rural community, where the need is just as great as it is in urban and suburban areas, but with perhaps a few more challenges because of our lack of access to partner arts organizations and the fact that lower population densities just make everything more expensive to do. As a conductor, I was of course intrigued by the musical results, but as a researcher, I was compelled by the potential community development impacts of El Sistema, particularly in the areas of educational equity. When I first learned about El Sistema, I had long had experiences in rural schools with teachers commenting on how different kids were on the days they had choir, especially BD, behavioral disorder, and DD, developmentally disabled kids. And while I think those are outdated terms, the experience shows what I think we as El Sistema educators need to recognize, which is that our programs not only teach music, but improve engagement and intrinsic motivation of our students across the board. From here, I also began to wonder how El Sistema programming might be applied to deal with long-standing issues I've had with how we introduce children to musical participation in this country. So I'm just going to come right out with it. I think it's crazy that in 4th or 5th grade, we just hand a child something like a clarinet along with a bucket full of expectations. When I just think about the kinesthetic challenges of starting on your first instrument, coping with everything from fingering to calluses to embouchure. And then on top of that, we say, now here's a staff, here's a treble clef, here's a quarter note. And by the way, here's some Italian on top of that. I just feel like we set kids up to fail that way. And I wonder who we lose from our programs because that's sort of the system we're operating within. And while I understand that instrumental education needs a certain level of growth and physical maturity, I really felt like we could teach musicianship far earlier. And by musicianship, I mean in an applied sequential skills way, not exposure, not participation, but true musicianship. So I built my programs differently. I wanted to craft an approach that was entirely based on helping kids identify and leverage their innate musicality, helping them to understand what they already hear and feel, connecting that knowing to musical concepts like beat, pitch, timbre, etc., then practicing intentional ways of applying that knowledge, primarily through games, and then using these experiences as handholds to then build sequential skills. Lastly, after watching the schools in my rural community work so hard over the last 15 years to engage their own in-house music specialists, I also felt it was really important that our programs complement and support that work. So beginning in 2019, we began to build curriculum for kids in K-5 along these lines. And we were preparing to launch the program in collaboration with our little community's brand new fancy schmancy YMCA. The plan was YMCA was going to provide Y-Care, their on-site daycare program, on-site at schools, and we would embed our program within that. And it was all set to launch in the fall of 2020. You can figure out where I'm going. So the program was designed to be daily, intensive, play-based, and very fast-paced, incorporating ear training, vocabulary, literacy, ensemble skills like conducting, catching an onset, following a clear cutoff, phrasing, ensemble practice, song repertoire, and laying down a foundation of STEM understanding and natural science understanding through collaborations with other natural science-based nonprofits, and taking advantage of the natural SEL environment that music instruction provides. In fact, while I was building this, this is exactly where we were when I was first introduced to ES USA. But you know what happened, COVID-19. So with the arrival of the pandemic, I, like most educators, spent the summer of 2020 scrambling and doing tons of tech trainings designed to help us explore how we move our teaching online. And while I initially participated in those trainings with an eye toward teaching our existing in-person ensemble programs, as I moved through the summer, I began to believe that online delivery of our new on-paper El Sistema program might actually be a better and maybe even an ideal fit. So in September of 2020, we launched the program virtually. It was focused on providing early childhood music for local kids originally as a pandemic stopgap. We started with 6 local students. The daily, weekday, no cost 30-minute sessions were designed to teach musicianship in a sequential skills way while also building school readiness, arts-driven STEM and SEL abilities, listening skills, leadership, and teamwork. For example, the citizen artist teacher student model that El Sistema espouses, in that model, students are encouraged to teach as soon as possible. And one of the many ways that we build this into the program is through regular video submissions where the kids demonstrate their learning by teaching it.
Hello, my name is Lizzie. Today we're going to learn about eighth notes.
And I'm going to show you how to learn eighth notes.
Eighth notes can share one beat.
This is the beam that connects them.
If it's just one, it has a flat, but this is a 2 one.
It goes for half a beat. I'm going to show you how with my kazoo.
Tiki, 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 tiki. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. I hope you liked my video. Make sure to sign up for Great Band's music class.
That's Anthony, who's always the big self-promoter in class. So as we originally planned, participants received that whole list of things I mentioned earlier: ear training, vocabulary, music literacy, ensemble practice, songcraft, cultural literacy, all those things. But what you can't see in our performance or demonstration videos are the most important parts, which are the friendships, not only between students, but between parents and families, helping each other with everything from tech navigation to musical experiments and so much more. While launched for kids in our own small community, the program quickly went regional. In fact, on the topic of those relationships and SEL educational opportunities, one of my favorite moments from the pilot year came in the winter term, when a student in the class who lives about 2 hours away first figured out that the rest of us were not local. She arrived that day in class very sad, but as class went on, she got even weepier. So I needed to stop the class and visit with her about what was going on and make sure things were okay. That whole class ended up being an SEL lesson where we learned about the importance of identifying and talking about our feelings, that music class was a safe place to do that in, and that what a difference it made and what a difference it didn't make that we were so physically far away from each other. We were already making excellent musical progress. By this point, the kids were identifying whole, half, and quarter notes and rests and demonstrating them in a number of ways. But that class session really brought home that we were also really providing a sense of community daily for kids. And I should have seen it earlier, because nearly immediately, the kids had started showing up for class early so they could visit about everything from what hair bows were being worn that day to how a birthday party went, if the tooth fairy came, and so much more. And they immediately became so good at taking care of each other. One of our pilot students was on the spectrum, and the kids quickly learned how to interpret and support this highly musical child's nonverbal participation in class. By the spring of 2021, this is how classes were going. Do one with the piano. Are you ready? 2, 3, 4. Okay, Harper, what did you think?
Blue.
Yes, excellent. What gave it away?
The first note.
The first note, the long half note. You're right. That's the only line with a half note at the beginning. That was the only line with a half note at the beginning. So, in fact, you just saw Harper identifying the blue line as the rhythm I was playing. But she's also made, and she's one of my favorite examples, some other really significant contributions. About 3 months earlier than this video had been taken, we've been working on beats. How beats are generally something you feel rather than hear, how they like to travel with their friends in groups, usually in groups of 3 or 4, and what those groups were called as we were getting ready to start working on staff-based notation. Harper raised her hand one day really excitedly right at the beginning of the class. And when I called on her, she kept saying, I know, I know, I know. And when I asked, what do you know, Harper? She explained, a group of chickens is a flock. A group of cows is a herd, and a group of beets is a measure. And it just blew my mind. I was like, oh, it's working. I just love this. And so there is something about this online environment that just empowers them to integrate their knowledge in the ways that make sense to them. And because it also makes sense to them, it makes sense to the other kids as well and empowers their teaching amongst each other. The students also co-created some really fun games that are now a vital part of our curriculum. For example, in the second month of the program in October of 2021, a very silly cat, which you can see on the screen, named Treble, began showing up in my virtual classroom for Halloween, just as I was beginning to teach intervals. The kids quickly made up a story about Treble liking to walk up and down the keys of my piano, typically in a Hanon exercise. And then when she would do this, that was her cue that she had seen something and we needed to hide from the Zoom screens. And then when they heard this, it was time for them to come back. Well, all it took was a week of us playing that game before they got the audio cues. And in the next week, they had the name of those audio cues as minor seconds and major seconds. And from there, we were able to build quite a bit. What next, of course, came perfect intervals. But again, we began to be able to be in things like tetrachords as well, because they sort of had those basic building blocks all from that original game. This remains a very favorite game. And now Treble has an entire wardrobe and a slate of actions for all the trouble that she can get into. So by taking advantage of kids' innate interest in technology and devices, the automatic focus that a Zoom environment helps little ones cultivate, and the enormous and growing number of tech tools and games for exploring ear training, literacy, and so much more, while also adhering to El Sistema's guiding principles to keep the program child-centered and striving towards excellence, we ended up with something that was making me very excited as a conductor. We were also noticing things like how siblings participated, particularly younger siblings. So as we wrapped up the initial year, we began making plans for an expansion that would incorporate kids as young as 2, going all the way up to grade 3. This is when OtterPod became Sound Scholars. Students today are now divided into age-based cohorts called pods, each named for a Hood Canal mammal that learns primarily through play. We play music, we play instruments. We wanted to incorporate that in as many ways as possible. And this is why it was important to mention earlier that our community is based on a fjord. OtterPod teaches kids in preschool ages 2 to 5. SealPod is for kids in grades K and 1. And PorpoisePod is for kids in grades 2 and 3. We also expanded our teaching team, adding teaching artists in multiple time zones and with a complementary set of teaching skills that combine not only early childhood expertise, but advanced degrees in psychology of music, music therapy, conducting, arranging, and composing, along with a host of instrumental and vocal skills from our performance practices. The best part of all of this is the collaboration. While one individual teaching artist may specialize in working with the otters, for example, and be with them every day, we're all always collaborating on pedagogical strategies, arranging vocals and instrumentals together, visiting each other's classrooms to troubleshoot, and so much more. And in this way, in addition to developing a relationship with their primary teacher and their primary aide, the kids also get to know all of the teachers, which I think facilitates participation in a multi-year continuum as they grow. To maximize access, we also focused on leveraging the strengths of the online platform in other ways. For example, pod members usually stay in their regular time slot, but on any given day, for example, if you're an otter, there are 5, 6, 7 OtterPod classes. And so, they all use the same Zoom link. So if you have a change of schedule, say a dentist appointment, a family can just jump into the most convenient OtterPod session that day without missing a day, no notice required. Although I have to admit, most of the time the families do give us notice. Ditto the wide array of devices that the kids can use to participate and how that increases accessibility. Any internet connected smart device with a browser works. And while kids usually stick with the same setup and location for class every day, it is not unusual to have kids attend class in a car seat with a smartphone and earbuds, or while away visiting their grandparents, for example. In other words, the online approach really seems to support consistent engagement and attendance, and they do not like to miss class. This is partly because they enjoy it so much, but in all honesty, I also think it's partly because for 30 minutes a day, they get unfettered device time, which is really important for kids. But also because each day of the week, there's also a little something different. We have a very set routine, but there are fun surprises every day. For example, Fridays have traditionally been our musical show and tell days, and no one misses musical show and tell. The result? Well, this is our most recent virtual ensemble performance collaboration. There's always one of those per term. The first verse is otters, the second verse is seals, the bridge is tutti, and the final verse is porpoises with some extra credit seal contributions. This final project capped off 10 weeks of ear training on major and minor seconds, literacy instruction mastering whole, half, and quarter notes and rests, measures, beats, and meters for the porpoises, and a host of songs that are a part of the class routine, as well as some incidental natural science, SEL, and STEM concepts.
I see trees.
I think my favorite part of that video is the parents at the end saying, very good. I also want to point out, you'll see some kinesthetic elements of the ASL that was added as a way to help the kids learn not only the words, but the song structure in their performance and how those song structure portions relate to each other. Today, Great Bend Sound Scholars Program is serving over 500 kids in 34 states and 6 additional countries, including Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Jamaica, Scotland, and Romania, daily. It is still no cost to participating families, and we're reaching so many kids with the least resources and the greatest of needs. Currently, 92% of our classes are online, but as we emerge from the pandemic, a growing proportion of our classes are in-person or hybrid. And we're working with a far broader range of partners. For example, the Child Care Action Council is a regional agency that provides Washington's version of Head Start classes across the northwest part of Washington state. And they've recently integrated our Sound Scholar program in their in-person and their online classes. As well, a couple of ESUSA sister organizations took advantage of the program this past fall as a method of stabilizing their offerings during pandemic uncertainties and maintaining relationships with their constituent families, which we were able to support by giving them a complete custom branded registration portal. We're also in conversations right now with a number of small rural school districts around the country for providing this program as part of their daily school day. In other words, by expanding the multi-year continuum downward, we've discovered we not only have significant value to provide for families, but we have the opportunity to develop more robust relationships with those families while building skills that make the rest of our programs more successful, all while showcasing the impacts and the values of El Sistema. On El Sistema, I really like Eric Booth's overview of El Sistema's guiding principles. And before I talk about how this kind of program expansion can help our organizations, I want to touch on how each of those guiding principles is expressed through Sound Scholars. I think the mission of social change is fairly obvious. It's at the heart of not only our Sound Scholars program, but everything in Great Bend's overall mission as an organization dedicated to exploring the many research-based ways that music can be used to build community. Every one of our programs is designed as much for its community development impacts as for its musical effects. That said, Sound Scholars has quickly become our flagship. It's such an excellent example of how music can help address broader social issues, in this case, educational equity. It's also an illustration of how we as teaching artists, while we're focused on building individual students' musicianship, learning capacity, emotional health, and resilience, we are also directly impacting our broader communities. As you all know, El Sistema programs approach access and excellence by striving to include as many children as possible, for as long as possible, and as young as possible, in an environment that is both child-centered and striving for excellence. For those students who discover not only interest but aptitude and who want to go further, Great Bend also provides additional opportunities through a program called High Key Kids, which provides group lessons, more advanced ensemble opportunities, and topical classes on everything from songwriting to digital audio production, also completely online. Then there's the nuclear environment, and I'm going to admit that this was the only thing I really worried about when launching the program. I wondered, would we be able to create community in a virtual classroom? But I think you've seen, and you'll see more of, I shouldn't have worried. The kids took care of that by themselves immediately in the way they connected with each other. Sound Scholars classes meet daily, and so they meet the intensity requirement and are very fast paced. Every 30-minute class incorporates all those elements I've previously mentioned, along with, additional SEL, songcraft, or whatever, and a fair degree of responsiveness to what the students are bringing to class in terms of their interests. All of our class content is organized around developing ensemble skill or facilitating teamwork. And this includes consciously developing skills like listening across the group and understanding your role within it, in addition to more practical skills like following a conducting pattern, counting your entrances, and catching a downbeat. We also particularly espouse the CATS teaching model. And you've already seen how we encourage students to share their knowledge as a part of their practice. But this also extends to all participants, which includes families and teachers and aides as well. For example, we have volunteers and partners in the program, and they are certainly briefed on each week lessons plans, but they're only taught the songs and the games and the concepts alongside the kids in class, and are often making the similar mistakes or worse mistakes, which gives the students such a great opportunity not only to learn, but to help lead the learning and to better identify their own strengths. Our program expands the multi-year continuum downward in extremely impactful ways. In fact, while the program officially accepts kids at 2, we've actually had a pair of 18-month-olds participating this year very productively in class. And so they've succeeded so much and have shown so much interest that we're considering adding a toddler pod next fall. So, and of course, you've seen the family involvement in the class recordings. Clicking through all our assignments and performance projects, you'll see even more of parents helping practice and grandparents giving praise and singing along. It's not unusual to see parents dancing along in the background during class. It's one of the most common comments I hear from parents about how engaging the music is and how many earworms there are in class. And while in a traditional in-person class, families might get collaborative on things like transportation, in our program, they're more likely to get collaborative in how they troubleshoot capturing performance recordings or encouraging daily practice. And I just love that, because that means that in addition to regularly collaborating, they're collaborating and sharing solutions and solving problems in ways that are deeply connected to the content, to the music that we're teaching. And again, it brings in regularly an intergenerational element that I find charming. which in itself is an illustration of the centrality of building connections and that guiding principle. I can't stress enough how tangible the sense of community is in class sessions, not just between students, but between families. And a big part of this is the daily aspect of the class and literally being in people's living rooms with them each day. But I also think that the way that we manage assignments and the community interactions on our learning platform are just as much a part of how we nurture community, not only during classes, but between. Each class definitely has its own vibe, and these connections are definitely stewarded by the program, but they don't stop there. They often transcend the program and lead to play dates, both physical and virtual, out of class and out of class collaborations. Eric Booth also writes that aspiration and ambition for excellence are both vital ingredients for the transformational success that manifests as social change. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Connecting with kids' interests and passions are how we build intrinsic motivation. But I also think Sound Scholars is an example of connecting with kids in the ways that they wanted to be connected with, and that inspire the way they currently frame their aspirations. Because let's admit, they all want to be YouTube and social media stars. So very quickly, they see that the digital audio, video, and musical production skills that are just baked into the very environment are essential to those ambitions. In fact, for some of them, coming to class is quite a bit like being a social media influencer right now. More importantly, we as parents also know that these abilities to capture, curate, edit, and present audio and video are critical school and later business success skills. In fact, because of all of this, I am really coming to think that extending our El Sistema offerings and El Sistema values into early childhood programs focused on building musicianship might be one of the most powerful ways for us to manifest our goal of social change, which is at the heart of the El Sistema ideal, bringing powerful benefits not just for our kids, but for our entire communities. My research suggests that all community musicians are building their communities' economies, civic engagement, health, and well-being in ways that extend far beyond their program's musical or cultural impacts. I think understanding how the social change we seek to manifest can manifest helps us not only better understand the community-wide impacts of our work, but also to hone our efforts. El Sistema early childhood programs in particular, I think have some powerful community benefits to offer. Early childhood education is well known to be one of the most powerful ways to cultivate educational equity in our communities. There's already a robust national conversation happening about what it would look like if we redefined childcare as early child education. And can you think of a more engaging educational environment for preschoolers than a musical environment? This is why, as we build our campus, 25% of the footprint is being dedicated to early childcare that will be completely developed as an extension of and as an expression of our Sound Scholar program. More, providing enriching programs like this for preschoolers is one of the most powerful ways to build a family's sense of investment and pride in their community, while also enhancing that child's academic success or likelihood of academic success. This improved sense of place and belonging has powerful economic impacts and literally helps to build strong families. More, these kinds of experiences are vital for attracting and keeping the creative class workers that are essential to 21st century economic development in our communities. And these are folks like teachers and healthcare workers that we're all struggling to find right now. And I don't think that's just a rural community challenge right now. Early childhood programs also, due to music's transcultural appeal, can also bring together otherwise disconnected segments of a community. This builds bridging connections that again fundamentally transform and improve a community's adaptive capacity because they change the way information flows through a community. Now, all community music programs do this to some degree, but early childhood programs, due to their very nature and the required engagement from parents and caregivers, really super duper encourage the development of bridging connections that are so important to a community's overall health. But this is just the beginning of the potential that early childhood programs have for our organizations. Early childhood programs also give us a longer runway and build the success of all of our other programs. Again, we can start teaching musicianship in a sequential skills way as early as age 2. That means that those kids, when they enter our traditional ensemble programs, are receiving their first instrumental instruction with a foundation of literacy, ear training, and ensemble skills already in place. More, by extending the multi-year continuum downward, we give ourselves the opportunity to introduce our model and our values to families earlier and longer, deepening our relationship with those constituents. And that helps us in a number of different ways, not least of which is the sustainability of our organizations. We have more teaching tools. In addition to these richer relationships, the online environment gives us an expanded set of teaching tools that meet kids right where they want to be right now. Per Booth's guiding principle of ambition and achievement, I mentioned how they all want to be social media influencers and YouTube stars. And really, I can't emphasize that enough. If you don't have kids in your house right now, like the minute they can say YouTube, that's all they want. I want my own YouTube channel. So Great Bend happens to be, well, here's how that can show up in class assignments. Great Bend happens to be located in Washington's 6th Congressional District. And US Representative Derek Kilmer was one of several electeds kind enough to meet with our sound scholars for our fall recital to answer the question, what are you most grateful for this year? The ensuing conversation was not only one of the highlights of our fall recital, but it illustrated to the kids the many other ways they might use the skills they're building in class to pursue other interests, even if that interest is finding out which Marvel superhero is your congressional representative's favorite.
What's your favorite Avenger?
What's my favorite Avenger? Iron Man.
Me too. I like Iron Man too.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
So as you could see, some of the best experience, he was only supposed to ask, what are you most grateful for this year? But some of the best experiences in class always come when the kids go off script. The virtual environment itself is so powerful with kids. They're extremely motivated to have device time, autonomy, and attention. And so they quickly learn what it takes to maximize their participation. And on smart teleconference software, that means knowing you have to wait your turn to speak, learning first and foremost how to mute and unmute yourself in order to participate, especially on show and tell day, which reinforces the sense of taking turns, paying attention to when it's the right time to contribute, and then doing so in the right way, building awareness of your classmates' interests and their strengths, and even just using the squares we're in. For example, I love using the Zoom squares to teach them how to conduct a 4 pattern by just tapping the sides. I'm in mirror, so I don't think that's coming across to you properly. But we really get a lot of value out of the online environment. By definition, that environment makes some ensemble and assignment participation a little bit more difficult because it requires independent work in between classes that both teaches practice, discipline, and self-esteem, because as we've all learned during the pandemic, recording yourself for a virtual ensemble thing is really hard, and it brings up all kinds of self-esteem issues. In fact, most of us who join ensembles, particularly choirs, do so because we don't want to hear ourselves sing. We want to be in a group. But the virtual environment means we have to do this as individuals, which actually has some powerful benefits. One of which is my favorite, is the benefit of, which I didn't see coming, the sequence of individual video submissions over time and how that empowers me as a teacher to document progress over time and to visit with students about, look at how much progress you've made on whatever it is, vowels, onsets, counting, keeping a steady beat, matching pitch, whatever it is, it's right there in front of them. So, and one last thing about the online teaching environment that I didn't expect and that I so love is that every time you log into our learning platform, you get to see what your friends are up to and watch their assignments. And I really believe this adds an extra dimension to the sense of community, both during and in between classes. This approach also extends our outreach. Organizationally, I think to some degree that we're all struggling with the 21st century reality that has made content king in terms of outreach, especially when it comes to social media, which is where we all have to be. Well, it was a completely unanticipated side effect that moving our programs online made them automatically content generation machines. The avalanche of student-driven content that arrives on our learning platform weekly isn't just raw material in itself. Many of our classes put the kids in the position of curating their content for public consumption, from the 8th Note video you saw earlier to the podcast video you just saw from this past November, and this most recent one.
1, 2, 3, 4, and a 1.
Just little bite-sized examples of how the kids are practicing their skills. In that example, following an onset and giving a beat that's in tempo. So in terms of outreach, there's just nothing like being able to show new families, not only what happens in class by inviting them to attend a session with a simple link, or being able to review some clips of recorded class sessions with them. But as I mentioned in the previous slide, it's also really powerful and very validating to be able to show individual progress with parents and students by reviewing their video submissions over a period of time. There are certainly challenges to teaching through technology and challenges in bringing the El Sistema approach to the pre-instrumental phase of development, that is early childhood. But as we're learning, there are also some really powerful benefits. One of these is expanded partnership opportunities. Again, I'm not an El Sistema expert, but my impression is that traditionally, we as El Sistema organizations are primarily focused on partnering with schools from kindergarten up. However, in the pre-K range, the diversity of potential partners grows to include not only schools, but nonprofits, childcare centers, churches, and even other ESUSA organizations. For example, this family from Baton Rouge, from a sister ESUSA organization, Kids Orchestra, shows not only the value sound scholars can provide for others, but the intergenerational aspects of the program.
It gives me a chance to spend a half an hour a day with Claire doing music. And to her dad, music is very, very important. He's a tubist and he's involved with Kids Orchestra. So music is really important to everybody in our family. And Claire's having a good time. It gives her some focus. It's getting her to do some things that I know her daddy loves and her great grandmother loved. And it's really a lot of fun. It's fun for me too.
So these partnerships are a powerful way to build community awareness and therefore facilitate our outreach efforts. But they also allow us to deepen the social change aspects of our missions in, I think, really interesting ways. This is especially true with other nonprofit organizations with complementary or overlapping missions. For example, this summer, Great Bend is delivering a slightly altered version of our Sound Scholars program in person for kids in residence at or receiving services from our county's domestic violence shelter. This is an opportunity not only to further our mission and apply the impacts of Sound Scholars in a more therapeutic way, but to collaborate with another social service nonprofit with a completely different mission in a way that is completely in line with our vision of social change through music. Thus, increasing our visibility with their constituents, their staff, and their board in a completely organic way and reinforcing our brand. Early childhood partnerships can also provide additional insight into how we connect with our community and perhaps open up new avenues of engagement. I mentioned earlier that Child Care Action Council, which provides those Head Start classes across Northwest Washington, and how they're integrating our classes into their classes. Well, that in turn is leading to those kids in those classes exploring what else Great Bend has to offer, and they're already registering for other class sessions in our schedule. We're also exploring a range of therapeutic youth programs with the local homeless youth center. And while that's not early childhood, that conversation that started with the conversation that we're having with the domestic violence shelter in terms of how we could extend the value that we're providing. But that's not all partnerships do. Partnerships can also diversify our access to funding. We all know how much foundations and granting agencies love collaborations between nonprofits. They're more sustainable and more stable. But this is just the beginning. As I've mentioned elsewhere, when we bring our El Sistema teaching skills to early childhood, we step beyond being purely arts educators to being advocates for educational equity, strong families, and secure kids. These are the fundamental elements to building educational equity in an early child way. So it's worth noting that early childhood development funding is often a completely separate source from arts education funding, and that diversifies the potential grant relationships that we can develop organizationally. Which is all to say, as I hope you're seeing, that no matter what age we're teaching, however we're doing it, as El Sistema educators, we are doing a lot more than teaching music. We are building our community's educational equity, civic engagement, economic development prospects, and health and wellness. And we're doing it in a particularly powerful way, especially when we bring the El Sistema approach to early childhood. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I am so honored again to have been invited to speak to you all today. I think you were so gracious with your time. I want to again thank our ESUSA colleagues for all of their hard work putting this symposium together and for their spotlight on our work. Just goes to show what an underfunded, tiny little creative startup can do. You can of course learn more about us at our website, which is greatbendmusic.org, or by emailing me at Matthew with 2 T's at greatbendmusic.org. But if you have any questions or anything to comment on, I'd be happy to do my best to answer now.
If you're a little too shy to say it out loud, go ahead and use the chat feature.
And I'll stop the share so we can see each other a little better.
All right. Well, Matthew, I guess we would love to say another big thank you to you for what you did for us this session. It was very informative, and I love the work that you're doing with our youth, our young youth in across the world. So everybody go ahead and take this time to have a bio break, get some nourishing food in you, and get ready for the next session. And again, I'd like to thank Matthew again, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you so very much, all of you. Thank you, and have a great rest of the symposium.